1886, on the occasion of receiving the degree of Doctor of Laws from Yale University, Justice Holmes spoke of the power of honor to bind men's lives. He said, "If it does not lift a man on wings to the sky, at least it carries him above the earth and teaches him those high and secret pathways across the branches of the forest, the travelers on which are only less than winged. You have done all that a university can do to fan the spark in me. I will try to maintain the honor you have bestowed." And how marvelously he has done so through the nearly 50 years which have passed since then. Justice Holmes will now speak to you from Washington, D.C.
In this symposium, my part is only to sit in silence. To express one's feelings as the end draws near is too intimate a task. But I may mention one thought that comes to me as a listener in. The riders in a race do not stop short when they reach the goal. There is a little finishing canter before coming to a standstill. There is time to hear the kind voice of friends and to say to oneself, the work is done. But just as one says that, the answer comes, the race is over, but the work never is done while the power to work remains. The canter that brings you to a standstill need not be only coming to rest. It cannot be while you still live, but to live is to function. That is all there is in living. And so I end with a line from a Latin poet who uttered the message more than 1,500 years ago. Death, death plucks my ear and says, live, I am coming.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. We now return you to the New York studios.
Fast-fading echo of the marching feet of 61 is being heard in Springfield as 1,200 Civil War veterans celebrate their 66th annual reunion. Womenfolk help to guide those with whom the spirit is more willing than their faltering limbs. Although Although their ranks are dwindling and the thin blue line grows smaller every year, there are still some left with young ideas.
They were a living testament to the great deeds of the past. They had witnessed great battles, had suffered and endured on fields of unprecedented carnage, places imbued by chance and fate with a great and terrible immortality. They had lived when dear comrades died, lived to tell of the bloody angle, the sunken road, the hornet's nest. That these men had willingly faced and endured such things together and persisted through the slaughter had much to do with duty and discipline and honor. But it had a great deal more to do with an abiding love for their country, of ideals they valued more than life itself. The Civil War was the fiery crucible of our history, all the more terrible for its inevitability. Brother drew sword on brother, and when those 4 bloody years were ended, more than 600,000 Americans lay buried in the soil of their youth. In the decades that followed the Great War between the states, the ties that bonded the survivors were strengthened by the formation of 2 great veterans organizations. In the South, the United Confederate Veterans. In the North, the Grand Army of the Republic. Though time steadily thinned the ranks of the UCV and GAR, the members of those fraternities of blue and gray remained undaunted by the infirmities of age, as they sought to honor and perpetuate the ageless glories of the boys of '61.
We're growing old, that's what they say. Our hair's turning fast to grey. Our steps are not so best confined as they were when we was 29, but the wrinkles on our face show clear. They've been there now, boys, for many a year.
The GAR and UCV met every year at their respective national encampments. The veterans would conduct their business, elect new officers, and spend hours with old comrades reminiscing about the triumphs and tragedies of their soldier youth. Although partisan hatred faded with the passage of time, sectional pride remained strong, and until the turn of the century, joint blue and gray reunions were rare. The veterans of both armies ensured by their separate Memorial Day observances that the fallen soldiers would be remembered. In declaring the 30th of May, the GAR's Memorial Day, Commander-in-Chief John A. Logan proclaimed, "If other eyes grow dull and other hands slack, and other hearts cold in the solemn trust, ours shall keep it well as long as the light and warmth of life remain in us." Often, the old soldiers would turn out in faded uniforms, braving the heat of summer or chill of winter to keep alive the imperishable legacy of their deeds. When French Marshal Foch toured the United States at the end of World War I, he visited a UCV contingent within the old Confederate earthworks that had once guarded Richmond, Virginia. For the youth of America, too, the grand old men were not forgotten.
Dixieland, the Old South. It's the 47th reunion of the Confederate veterans. They grow fewer and fewer. At Jackson, Mississippi, only 200 attend. But a soldier of Lee still can dance with a girl. One thing will still make his old feet go, and that's Dixie. On he dances, as long as he can. Army of the Republic, grand in historic memory, but fading away in the numbers that march. GAR encampment at Madison, Wisconsin, and fewer than 200 of the boys in blue. There's Governor Phil LaFollette of Wisconsin. These Union veterans will join Confederate veterans in the 75th anniversary celebration of Gettysburg, the blue and the gray, next summer. But they protest against the Confederate flag. They still have pep and still can fight the Civil War.
Civil War veterans fight it over. Thinning ranks of old men parade with brave front. At Portland, do you remember when?
What do you think of the styles of the young women nowadays, Captain?
All right. How are you, gentlemen? And when the battle opened up in the wilderness, a lot of his old schoolmates and friends come flying back to the rear. And he says, what in the hell and damnation are you running so for? He says, simply because we can't fly. As we run into Grant or Grant run into us.
The stalwart boys in gray, now aging but vigorous grandfathers, treasured the heartfelt legacy of the lost cause and found joy in the celebration of that never-to-be-forgotten time. General John B. Gordon, the first commander-in-chief of the UCV, stressed the patriotic duty of his organization. The UCV will cherish the past glories of the dead Confederacy, Gordon said, and transmute them into living inspirations for future service to the living republic. The leadership of the United Confederate Veterans included dignified old warriors like Richard A. Sneed of Mississippi, Charles Alfred de Saussure of Memphis, Tennessee, and Leonard Waller Stevens, a soft-spoken veteran of Company A, 27th Louisiana Infantry.
Commander-in-Chief, the United Confederate Veterans.
You want me to reply? Mr. Mayor, I greatly appreciate your congratulations and good wishes. Is that enough, or you want me to say? What do you want me to say?
The General.
No, you.
Me? General Leonard Stevens, I want to congratulate you upon your election as Commander-in-Chief of the United Confederate Veterans, and I wish you a successful administration.
I thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to say furthermore that in the name of the Confederate veterans, we thank you for your noble effort toward giving us this royal welcome that we've had here. All right.
With his white mustache and goatee, Charles de Saussure looked the epitome of the Southern colonel. His father, a South Carolina plantation owner, was a Confederate surgeon. De Saussure enlisted at age 16 and helped man the guns of the Beaufort Volunteer Artillery at the battles of Honey Hill and Bentonville. Harry Rene Lee, seen here in his distinctive white uniform, served with the 34th Mississippi at Perryville, Chickamauga, Lookout Mountain, and in the Atlanta Campaign. His post-war career included a stint in the British Navy during the war with Egypt. Homer T. Atkinson was a lifelong resident of Petersburg, Virginia. Joining the 19th Mississippi, Homer Atkinson was among the gallant defenders of Fort Gregg, a Confederate bastion that bore the brunt of the final Yankee onslaught at Petersburg, April 2nd, 1865. When he died in 1945, Atkinson was one of the last 6 surviving officers of the Civil War. John M. Claypool of the 12th Tennessee was wounded at Stones River, Chickamauga, and Franklin, where he planted his unit's banner on the Yankee works. This steadfast old warrior, ever ready to honor the memory of Jefferson Davis and the Southern Confederacy, died in 1945 of a broken heart, it was said, when a promised vehicle failed to arrive in time to take him to the annual Memorial Day celebrations. In New York City's annual Memorial Day parade, survivors of Gettysburg and the Wilderness marched with the veterans of San Juan Hill and Chateau Thierry. In the 1932 parade, there was even a contingent of German World War I vets. The blue-clad GAR was always a conspicuous part of the festivities, living relics of a distant past. Charles Earl of the Hawken Zouaves was a yearly fixture in the New York parade, one of the last survivors of those exotically uniformed warriors of the Union. The group of GAR men attracted the attention of a zealous newsreel reporter.
265. This flag is of the Hawken Zouaves, New York. Now salute. All right, let's go. What's that now once?
Yeah, now say it. Start in speaker.
Say what?
Start it in now.
You want the same thing again? We are the veterans of the Civil War, 61 to 65. And this is the flag of the Hawken Zouaves.
Their spokesman, the Reverend Walter Hammond, had left his studies at Harvard University to become a sergeant in the 47th Massachusetts Volunteers. Another New York veteran was William Henry Jackson, whose wartime service in the Vermont Brigade was eclipsed by his later fame as one of the great photographers of the Western frontier. In May 1865, the armies of the Union marched triumphantly through Washington. 50 years later, the men of the GAR, 20,000 strong, retraced the route of the Grand Review. Memories of that earlier review were still fresh in the minds of the aging soldiers, who by 1915 were dying at a rate of 34,000 per year. But as in 1865, the sadness was far outweighed by the joy they felt in the familiar beat of drum, the cadenced step, and the cheers of 250,000 spectators. One old Yank, George G. Burlingame, still sported the uniform he had worn as a soldier in the 1st Massachusetts Heavy Artillery. His musket still held a round he had loaded in 1865. In its barrel he carried a sign that read, "As I marched down this avenue 50 years ago." As in 1865, the historic avenue echoed with hoofbeat and marching tread, the blood-stained banners of famous regiments proudly borne. The Old Guard of Washington, D.C. A drill team of Union veterans marched in colorful tailcoats and bearskin shakos. As they had once passed President Andrew Johnson, so now the tattered colors and proud defenders of the Union filed past President Woodrow Wilson. Beside him in the reviewing stand, the parade's Grand Marshal, 4 times wounded Civil War veteran and retired General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, Nelson A. Miles. The most striking feature of the parade was a huge American flag, 150 feet long, weighing half a ton, the largest banner in the world, carried by 117 GAR men of the William McKinley Post of Canton, Ohio. Intertwined with the veterans' memories of camp and battlefield was an abiding love for music.
Maine.
Stirring and sentimental tunes still had the power to evoke martial spirit, a sprightly dance, laughter and tears, and the undying zest for life that these old men carried forever in their youthful hearts. While their determination never faded, and their fervent patriotism remained undimmed, with the passage of time the veterans' steps grew halting, their bodies frail. Many were too infirm to participate in the yearly parades, and watched sadly from the sidelines. Each year their numbers were smaller. A proud old cavalryman might still ride a horse, but as the years went by, the old soldiers were inevitably compelled to ride in automobiles, despite their frequent protests. Fewer were able to march unaided. Technological advancements saw new armies take the field with deadly new instruments of destruction. With their deeply rooted experience of soldiering, many Civil War veterans displayed an eager curiosity in the latest military technology as America girded for a Second World War. Their numbers rapidly diminishing, stalwart spirits at last bowing to remorseless time. In 1938, the men of the Union and the Confederacy prepared for a last great reunion, the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Ailing and bent with age, many confined to wheelchairs, the fragment of the blue and gray mustered on that hallowed ground.
More than 160,000 soldiers fought at Gettysburg, but only 65 who actually took part in the offensive returned for the reunion. The average age of all the veterans in camp in 1938 was 94, but they had lots of fun in boasting of their health and strength.
It was an unforgettable event, the climax of their long service. One last chance to visit with old comrades, to joke and reminisce, and to share the legacy of their deeds with new generations.
One of the most interesting camera subjects was Mr. William H. Jackson, a volunteer in Stannard's Vermont Brigade. Soon after the war, he became the pioneer photographer of the then unknown Far West and was first to record the wondrous beauties of Yellowstone Park. During various Civil War campaigns, Mr. Jackson made now invaluable sketches of important battles and historic areas. And how the words did fly. These aged but talkative vet living stories of tempestuous maneuvers and sallies, probably much in the style of the Union General Hancock's account of Lee's costly attack on Cemetery Ridge. And everybody was all ears when they told of events associated with monuments and areas now in Gettysburg National Military Park.
Glimpses of that poignant gathering at Gettysburg were preserved by newsreels and home movies that carried the memories of a heroic age into an uncertain future. The most impressive ceremony at the Gettysburg reunion was the unveiling of the Peace Light Memorial, an event attended by many dignitaries, among them President Franklin Roosevelt. Curious and reverent, tens of thousands gathered to watch the solemn commemorations.
Veterans of the blue and the gray, the United States, I accept this monument in the spirit of brotherhood and peace.
Few spectators were on hand for a humbler but far more moving event. At the famous stone wall on Cemetery Ridge, where on July 3rd, 1863, the high tide of the Confederacy had thundered against General Hancock's Second Corps, a handful of veterans, blue and gray, met once more, this time in peace. Where clubbed musket and bayonet once beat and slashed in bloody confrontation, now hands were outstretched and grasped in fraternal comradeship. This handshake across the wall had been a feature of earlier reunions. Then, as now, it was a heartfelt ritual that more clearly than any other ceremony personified the mutual admiration and respect of Yank and Reb, born of their common love of America.
All right. That's the rebel yell.
At last, the inevitable end drew near. The gallant armies, now but a shadow, gnarled and stooped with age, awaiting the last bugle call. The tap of canes and the gentle creak of crutches kept pathetic time to the blare of marching tunes and the clank of arms. The old feet shuffled and faltered in a way which showed that their march was nearly over, and there were many tears. Reduced to a mere handful, the veterans' organizations held their last reunions, their spirits strong, though their bodies were weak.
The Grand Army of the Republic still lives in the undying spirit of these 10 aged and feeble veterans. All New York could muster for Memorial Day, 1939. There aren't many left now. The youngest here is 91, America's oldest living heroes.
On August 30th, 1949, the 83rd and final meeting of the GAR was held at Indianapolis. The 6 frail centenarians voted to disband the once mighty Legion that at its peak numbered more than 400,000. Albert Henry Woolson, veteran of the 1st Minnesota Heavy Artillery, was the last of these stalwart Union soldiers. When he died on August 2nd, 1956, President Eisenhower said, "His passing brings sorrow to the hearts of all of us who cherish the memory of the brave men on both sides of the war between the states." The United Confederate Veterans lived up to the vow made decades earlier by Commander-in-Chief Stevens.
But we will hold a reunion so long as there are 2 veterans left to hold it.
A 5-day celebration at Norfolk, Virginia marks the final reunion of the United Confederate Veterans. It's the 61st encampment of Ranks of the Gray, and only 3 of the 12 survivors of the South's gallant host could be on hand to recall the embattled days. All 3 are 105, but like William D. Townsend of Ola, Louisiana, are spry for their years. Joe Solling, here of Virginia, took his first airplane flight to attend the reunion, as did W.J. Bush, who flew in from his home at Fitzgerald, Georgia.
revered as living symbols of a bygone era. At heart, they were still just boys in gray. No veteran more eloquently defined the abiding spiritual lessons of our war between the states than did Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, Colonel of the 20th Maine, Brevet Major General and recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. In a speech he gave to the veterans gathered on the battlefield of Gettysburg, Joshua Chamberlain expressed the enduring message of those gallant soldiers, North and South, who had fought so bravely for ideals they cherished more strongly than life itself. No chemistry of frost or rain, no overlaying mold of the season's recurrent life and death can ever separate from the soil of these consecrated fields the lifeblood so deeply commingled and incorporate here. Ever henceforth under the rolling suns, when these hills are touched to splendor with the morning light, or smile a farewell to the lingering day, the flush that broods upon them shall be rich with a strange and crimson tone, not of the earth, nor yet of the sky, but mediator and hostage between the two. In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass, bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls, and reverent men and women from afar, and generations that know us not, and that we know not of, heart drawn to see where and by whom things were suffered and done for them, shall come to this deathless field to ponder and dream. And lo, the shadow of a mighty presence shall wrap them in its bosom, and the power of the vision pass into their souls.